Flip our latch right here. And we have about a 30-second toolless installation. All of our props look like they're in a direct line. I'd say that's a win. This is actually really, really bad. There's actually no hardware fastening. First, starting at one side. I think we're going to work on the, I don't know what to call this, the spanner, the bottom rung. We're going to work on this first. We need to cap the ends of it, and we need to weld the tabs on for the adjustable feet. So I think I'm going to work on these ends first. I'm going to do just a little bit of cleanup, and I'm going to round the corners on the caps just so it welds up and cleans up a little bit nicer, so we have a more uniform weld around the edge. All right, that's pretty good and flat. You can check it by putting it on your table or something flat. Those are good. Let's round the corners on these caps right quick. You can see I've just rounded the corners a little bit on that so it fits tighter. So we don't have a square corner protruding because we've got a radius on our square tube. So you can see how the roundness of the square tube fits the roundness of our cap now. One more to do. Keep thinking I have all my pieces ready, and there's always one more step. Those both fit. I think we can start tacking stuff up. I'm going to start with just a few tacks to get it held in place, then we'll weld a side at a time. I'm pretty good with that. We're going to go ahead and weld it up. How are we looking? That's looking pretty. Pretty pleased with that. Turned out pretty to me. Pretty pleased with that. Let's hold this next one on. Do the same thing, couple little tacks. Got it centered up. Hit that with the grinder real quick. I got a little bit of a blob. You can see I've got a blob hanging off the end there. I wasn't real happy with that. Other than that, I'm pretty happy with the welds. That turned out pretty cool. Probably need to figure out exactly, am I going to weld this together next? Or am I going to weld the flat plate on top? Wonder what's going to be the best way to tackle this. I could get a bar clamp and clamp that together, or I could just tack it and roll with it. It's probably going to be easier to weld this on here first, and then we can set this on top and tack it like so. I think that's going to be a better plan. So let's weld it to our flat plate first. This is 16 inches, so 8 is center, 7 to 9 are both sides of our 2-inch tubing. So we'll make a mark at 7, make a mark at 9. 2.5 is center, so 1.5, 1.5 to 3.5 are going to be the outside edges of our square tube. Alright, so you can see we've got a square marked in the very middle where the square tube goes. I've already checked these ends for square. There's a couple ways to make sure this is square with the tabletop. I've got a level right here. This bench should be flat, but it's got some age on it. That's actually showing I'm a little bit out of level. Probably, well, it's not a 1/16 of an inch over 5 inches. What is this showing is happening right now? Pretty close to the same, so that may actually be square. We can also put a square against this right here. That's showing to be out of 1/8. I'm going to trust that pretty well, so we're definitely going to make it square that direction. Well, that's actually showing to be pretty perfect, so there might be a little bit of a bow in this steel plate. Unfortunately, there's not enough plate width-wise right here to get a good reading, I wouldn't say, on whether or not it's straight that way. That's showing pretty good. Let's go ahead and put a couple of tacks on this, because I think we're close. I'm going to go ahead and tack this side. Let's leave that square right there. Looks like we're still lined up on the base. I'm confident enough to put a tack on it. There's a little bit of airspace against the top of that square. That's showing pretty good. I'm going to tack the other side. All right, both sides are tacked. Let's check and make sure that's still pretty square. That is still showing square, definitely. And that might be the thickness of a postage stamp. So that's pretty good. This is the one I'm most concerned about because I don't have a good bearing surface for my square, and that's showing quite a bit of gap if you can see it. I've got a heavy 1/16, if not an 1/8 inch of gap right there. So we might need to do something about that. Well, it's showing it there too. Well guys, you never know what you're gonna learn. I just went to check my video footage and noticed that I ran out of memory 20 minutes into the video and lost the entire part of this weld up and build. So I'm just gonna give you all a rundown of what I did. Last time you saw me, we were welding the main post to our sandwich plate. We got that stitched all the way around. We brought our spreader up to the top, and I used a piece of angle iron with clamps to get that completely aligned. Once that was aligned, I placed tack welds around the sides, checked square. It did stay square, and I was able to seam weld all the way around. Once we got that welded on, we finished the spreader plate by plug welding the feet receivers into the very bottoms. There were 3 holes drilled in those receivers already that were meant for wood screws to hold onto the bottom of a table leg or something like that. I just have these plugs so we don't get paint in there. And basically I just sandwiched those on with a clamp, plug welded 1 hole pulled the clamp off and plug welded the other 2 holes. I've already screwed the feet in one time just to test fit them. They do run all the way in. I double checked our height. So that you missed that part on the very bottom. Up here at the top, we have our sandwich plate. I'll explain what I did on the sandwich plate. It's bolted together right now. So I did start by bolting the sandwich plate together with regular nuts and bolts. Then I made a couple of dowels. I had extra holes in the middle for my dowels that were too long, and I'll show you right here. To make my dowels, I took a 2.5-inch bolt that had about 3/4 of an inch of smooth shoulder, and I cut the head off. I wanted to just use the smooth shoulder. Then I used a nut and a stack of washers to set the depth on that, so the shoulder of that bolt was about half depth on the back side of my sandwich plate. Then I put a plug weld on the back side. I pulled the nuts and washers off and cut the back side off. So you can see the back side of those dowel pins right here. I cut them off flat, ground them smooth with the grinder. And what those dowel pins do is it allows us to bolt this together in the same position every single time, whether the nuts and bolts are in or not. So once I finished with the dowel pins, I screwed our nuts and bolts in, all 4 corners, and then you can see I've got tack welds around the nuts, and I welded all these nuts to capture them, because this sandwich plate, the back side of this, is going to be screwed to the tabletop, and this will be inaccessible. So now we can just use our impact and pull these bolts out. I'll show you what the dowels look like. Then I'm going to put these bolts back in, and I'm going to weld some thumb tabs to the top, so hopefully this can be a tool-less assembly and disassembly on the table. So this is our back sandwich plate that comes off. You can see all the small holes that are going to screw this to the tabletop. Our nuts captured to the back. And these are the dowels I was talking about. So I just used the smooth shank at the top of a 2.5-inch by 3/8 bolt, and they're ground flat on the inside. This is where I had a plug weld holding the top. Ground that off flat. So that's going to help this align the same way every single time. And if our feet are slightly adjusted out of if our feet are slightly out of adjustment to each other to allow for problems in the concrete, these dowels will have this always go back the same way, so the owner doesn't have to readjust the feet every time. While I've got this here, I've been meaning to put a little bit of a bevel on the tops of these dowels just to help the assembly go faster and easier. I'm not using the grinder on this, just a little bit with a file, just to knock the burr off the tops of the dowels. All right, I can see we've got a bevel all the way around those pins. So our sandwich plate, remember this is bolted to our table. That slips right on. And all of these bolts are lined up now because of the dowels, so there's no fight in getting these bolts aligned. This will go together smoothly and easily. All right, let's make some thumb tabs for those bolts. So I'm going to cut 4 pieces of this 1/4-inch dowel rod, 2 inches long. Tell you what I'm thinking right now too. It might be easiest to weld these on before I cut it off. What do you say we do that? I can just hold that on exactly like so. Get that welded on. It'll actually be straight on both sides. I'm going to measure back 1 inch so we can get it centered. Let's get it tacked on. We'll make a 2-inch mark so we know where to cut. These were pretty tight from putting them on with the impact. I'm gonna pull them all out now. Let's clean this back up with the flap disc and with our wire wheel, and then we'll take these over to probably the grinder, maybe the flap disc, and we'll get these cleaned up a little bit and beveled so there's no sharp edges. Okay, that's pretty smooth. Let's work on our hardware that we're making over here. All right. Let's see if we can just clean this up on the flat disc. We got a nice bevel on the edges now. Probably hit that with a wire wheel, and those will get painted. 1 down, 3 to go. I think I'm pretty happy with that. This turned out pretty neat right there. Just right for twisting in by hand. All right, let's do a trial run. Okay. This is on the tabletop. Dowels have it lined up. See how that fits on? Now these should already be aligned because the dowels. Spin those in. All right. These feel really natural. It's always cool when an idea seems to work out in the end. So, just hand tighten those. Hand tighten. That's rigid. That's going to be plenty good enough. That's absolutely going to be a toolless installation. Now he can just bust them loose. I had to get them pretty tight. Might have to hit him with a hammer or something depending on how tight he gets them. Those come right out. Cool. So there you go. We are done with our assembly. This is cleaned up and ready for paint. Let's move over to the tabletop and get the top section mortised in before we paint. Let's get the top section mortised in, then we'll get everything painted up, and we'll be on to final assembly and our install. It's time to do some woodwork. Here's the metal table frame that we already made, and here's the top portion of our sandwich plate. I'm wanting to mortise it or recess it into this tabletop just like these reinforcement straps that the homeowner put in. So we're going to make a template out of 3/4 inch plywood to use with the router, and we're going to route this in so it's nice and flat and even and fits super tight. So let's get started. We're about to make a jig for this router. I have a 1/2 inch bit chucked up in the router, a spiral bit, and then you can see I've got a bushing on the base right here. That bushing is going to ride on a template, and the spiral bit is how we're actually going to make a cut in our top. I didn't want to risk using saws and cutting directly on the top freehand, so we're going to make a jig for this first so we can get a perfect cut. So first thing I'm going to do is I can tell the distance from the side of our spiral to the outside of the collar is 3/16 of an inch. 3/16 of an inch. So we're going to have that wasted distance on both sides of our cut. 3/16 all the way around is how much bigger we need to make our cut in our jig. This is going to be our jig material right here. So 3/16 times 2, 6/16, 3/8. So our plate is 16 inches by 5 inches. So we want to be 5 3/8 by 16 3/8. 16 3/8 by 5 3/8. It's not a chalk pen, it's a soapstone. So we'll make a temporary mark there. Now, this jig, let's go ahead and mark out our cut on this. I'm going to clamp this on like so. We can start anywhere in here. Let's say we're going to start at 12 inches. 12 plus 16 3/8 would be 20. So I'm marking out the cut that we're going to make here. All right, so I have a rectangle marked out, 3/8 inch total, oversized for that plate to allow 3/16 margin all the way around the edges for the distance between our bushing and our bit. So we're going to get this cut out on the table saw now, and then we'll move back over here, clamp it down, and work on making our cut. All right, let's get our template cut out. We want to be 3 1/4 in from the outside edge. I'm trusting that this was ripped uniformly. It looks like it was cut on a table saw. I'm going to verify to our tooth 3 1/4, and we're going to go ahead and plunge cut and make these 2 side cuts. I've not yet decided how I'm going to cut out the short sections. All right, let's check and make sure we're 5 3/8. That opening is exactly 5 3/8, and that opening is exactly 5 3/8. I'm pretty happy with that. Now as for these, I think I'm just going to use a skill saw. That'll be the fastest thing, and it ought to be accurate enough. All right, our rectangle's cut out. Let's grab our plate and make sure it fits right. Before we leave the saw, I want to make sure that this plate fits in here with a 3/8 inch margin all the way around. That's a little over 3/8, probably 7/16. That's right at 3/8. That's right at 3/8. This should work just fine. All right, let's go back up to our top and set up the router. All right, moving over to our tabletop, let's actually set this up to cut our mortise. Let's make a couple of marks on here. We need to mark center a couple of directions. Need a tape measure. All right, I want this leg to be 16 inches back from this edge here. I'm gonna mark the center of our mortise. Half of 5 3/8 would be 2 1/2 plus 3/16 would be 2 11/16. So I'm gonna make a mark there, 2 11/16 and 2 11/16. I'm gonna check it the other direction, just make sure it's the same. Still 2 11/16. All right, now I'm no longer working off the edge of the plywood. All of my measurements are gonna be off the inside of the mortise because that's all that matters. The outside of the plywood is just something to clamp with. So this is a center mark right here. We're gonna make a center line of our mortise. And that's what I want to be 16 inches off this outside edge of the tabletop, the table extension. Now same thing here. 16 3/8. So we're gonna be 8 3/16. It's actually a touch over. So I'm gonna go 8 and between 3/16 and 1/4. 8 and between 3/16 and 1/4. I'm gonna check that from the other side, make sure we're centered. That's right. Yep, exactly the same. I'll make another line through here. All right, that should help us get aligned on the tabletop, and then we will clamp it down here. This is irregular edge on both sides. I wonder how we know what the center is. 2 3/4, 2 3/4, 2 3/4. How are we going to find the center on this table? We could use his latches, 8 1/2 to center, 8 3/4 to center. What do we call center? Interesting. I really want this leg to be in line with the other 2 legs that we already have installed on the table. Looking at the board widths, that joint's 19 1/4, 20 1/2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 screws. So this is theoretically the center. And that is 19 5/8, 19 and close to 5/8. 20. I almost think I need to carry this back over there, position the leg in line, and then make a mark. I definitely don't want this leg to be off center with the other 2 that are already there. All right, we're back on site, and I'm basically trying to find out where center is of this tabletop because of the irregular edge. I really should have brought a longer level with me, but I'm just running down the side of the existing 2 supports, and I'm making some pencil lines on blue tape on our top that should allow me to draw a center line through our extension. And this is all just because of the irregular edge. Now these lines here should be able to carry right on through. All right, over here, I'm just extending the marks that I already made. All right, just to make sure my line stayed right, 5 1/4, 5 1/4, 5 1/4. By the time we get out here, we're still at 5 1/4. Cool. So to split them down the middle, that would be 2 1/2, 2 5/8. So from 10 to 12 5/8 should be center. 10 to 12 5/8. We'll do the same thing right here. 10, 12 5/8. Should be our center mark. Not having a straight edge is making this nearly impossible. I guess I'll just take a quick glance at it, make sure I'm happy with it. And if I am, we'll go back to the shop and use this center mark for centering up our template, and we'll measure 16 inches back from the end, and that should work for us. All right, we're back at the shop with our markings. So we're going to start by putting a center line all the way across. Back 16 inches from the edge. We've got a center mark. Back 16 inches from the edge. We've got another center mark. Now I'm going to use a straight edge to connect all of these. Okay. And I'm going to connect here. Okay, now we have a center mark in line with the two existing supports for the table, and we have a line parallel with the end, perpendicular with the side, to align our template with in the 16-inch direction. Now what I'm curious about, that's showing about 20 inches from the edge, 19 3/4 from the edge, so we might have been 1/4 to 1/2 inch off if we had just guessed at the center. 20 1/8, 19 1/4. So it's a good thing we went and looked at those table legs and drew a line with our straight edge. We probably would have been off. I'm seeing this screw is not quite on the center. That screw is on the center. Here's a question. I wonder. Okay, cool. That line is pretty well perpendicular to the end of the table, so that's a good sign. It's not perfect, but it's close enough that I bet that was the intention when the top was installed. So, we've got all that. And we have center marks up here on our template. So now what we can do is line up the center marks on the template with the center marks on our tape. And we are ready to cut mortises. So, this is what we're running for a router. I'm just doing a little test run to make sure I'll be able to support everything. I might not be able to get the very middle very well, but I'll be able to scoop that out or do something. So let me grab some hearing protection. We'll power this up and we're gonna go ahead and start cutting. Before we do cut, we need to set our depth. We have depth stop adjustments, and they are in 1/4 inch increments. So what I'm going to do is bring the router over here. I'm going to push it down until it just touches our top, and I'm going to go ahead and lock this stop down. So that'll now let me cut it won't allow me to cut it all. Now if I spin this around, I should be cutting exactly 1/4 deep. You can see the gap right there between the stop and this pillar, and that's the depth of my cut, and that should be right at 1/4 inch because I just measured these stops are 1/4 inch apart. So this would be 1/4 inch deep, 1/2 inch deep, 1 inch deep. All right, let's go ahead and make our cut. Alright, let's see how that looks. That really looks pretty good. I dropped our plate in, it seems to fit. This was a little bit too wide for the width of my base, so the center is not exactly flat. I'm going to use a chisel to clean that up and we should be in good shape. Cool, let's take off our template, see how it really looks. Our mortise is cut. Our plate drops in like so. I'm very happy with that. Pretty flush with the boards. No rocking, fits nice and tight. So it's actually upside down right now. These nuts need to go on the back side, so I'm gonna find a bit and let's countersink those. All right, we're gonna mark where to drill these holes. I'm just gonna put this on upside down. I'm going to center it up. Once I've got it all centered up, I'm gonna drop a pencil in here. Mark where that hole is. Mark where that hole is. Mark where that hole is. All right, I can see I've got good markings on all of those. Let's rock this out of here. And I already looked at the depth. We're gonna drill about half the depth of this Forstner bit as relief for those nuts. Remember on our assembly over here, come back to our main assembly. We've got this held together. That's how far through one of our bolts is going to protrude. So let's compare that to this Forstner bit. It looks like we need to go a bit depth and just a little bit more. So honestly, half a bit depth past what we already did should suffice. All right, we can see right here that that bolt protrudes about 3/16 of an inch. So I'm gonna run them all through about 3/16 of an inch and set this on and make sure it still fits flush. All right, let's set this in and see how it fits. Super. And honestly, they can all thread in a little bit excessively, so it's never gonna back out. That's gonna work fantastic. So it's actually time for us to pre-drill. I'm gonna go ahead and drive in the screws and screw this in. Once it's fit, we'll pull it back apart and prep it for paint. All right, let's get this screwed in. I'm trying to pick a drill bit that is just the size of the shank, so the thread's cut or just a little bit smaller than the shank. We're going to say an 1/8 inch is going to fit that well. I also want to make sure that I do not cut deeper than I need to. So I'm going to make a mark on this drill bit 3/4 of an inch back so I don't drill too deep. See, I'm putting tape on the drill bit about 1 inch back. So I'm going to over drill these about 1/8 of an inch, but that's gonna make sure I don't blow all the way through the top. We're gonna start with just 4 corners. Then once it's fastened down straight, we'll fill in the rest. All right, everything's pre-drilled. I was gonna fill it with screws, but I drove the 2 in. I know that they fit. I don't see any reason to drive the rest. The fewer times we drive those in and out, the stronger this joint's gonna be. So I'm gonna pull out the 2 and probably am just gonna make a mark where the dowels are, just so I know I get this plate back on exactly like I had it. So everything lines up perfectly, and I believe we're ready to clean up and paint. All right, let's get some paint on our project. I'm gonna give everything a quick wipe down with lacquer thinner, shake up our paint, and we'll get to painting. Well, we got our tabletop brought in. I've got the legs right here. My dowel pins are on the correct side, and that just fell into place. I'm really pleased with that. Let's get our T-bolts buzzed in. Be interesting to see a timestamp on this. I wonder if you practice how long it would take to put this together and take it apart. Wanted it to be fast and easy and toolless. So far, we have achieved toolless. I'm going to use tools to set the elevator feet. Make sure that I'm not putting these so tight he can't take them apart. That'll come off by hand. That'll come off by hand. Great. I just want to make sure I don't do something that he can't get undone. All right, that's on. Our elevator feet are slightly loose. Let's get this flipped over and see how hard it is to clip on by yourself. It's definitely not light. The felt pads on the bottom should keep us from scratching the floor even if we drag it a little bit. Cool. That popped right on. I'm going to flip this latch over here. Done. Flip our latch right here. And we have about a 30-second toolless installation. The last thing we have to do is set our elevator feet to get this top perfectly level. So let me grab my level. I've got a couple wrenches right here ready, and we'll lock those in position. The existing top is sitting pretty perfectly level. Let's see what our extension looks like. I'm going to scoot this chair out of the way just a little bit and give us a little bit of room. All right. That actually looks perfectly level as well. So we can check this for level. That looks like it actually rises a little bit. So instead of using level on this side of the table, I'm just going to sight down the edges. That shows that it's falling. So we definitely need to bring those elevator feet up a little bit. Let's sight down it so I can get an idea what we're going to take. I'm just looking down the line on the edge of the table. I can see that it falls off dramatically, probably 1/4 of an inch. Same thing on this side. So I'm going to lift up a little bit and screw those elevator feet down about 1/4 inch. We can set our level across the seam now and check. Not for level necessarily, but I'm looking to see no gaps under the level. I want to see it set on the tabletop and the extension equally. It's showing, if anything, this could come up just a little bit more, but it's pretty insignificant. That side is actually showing to be a little bit high. So I'm going to drop this corner down just a little bit. Let's see if that did it for us. It's hard to tell with lumber too. Nothing's perfectly flat. I've got an 1/8 inch of crown in this alone. So let's sight down it one more time. We're going to trust our eye more than anything. I'm going to say that looks pretty good. And really, I want this to come up a little bit more, just to be honest. Let's see what that does for us. I'm pleased with that. There is not much play in that, especially with the weight of the table holding the felt feet down. So now that the feet are adjusted like I want them, I have these set nuts on the bottom. I'm going to run these set nuts up and I'm going to tighten them against the spreader on the bottom. And I'm noticing right now that this foot has no weight on it, so I'm going to preload it just a little bit. That just tells me this tabletop's twisted a little bit since we couldn't get it perfectly level and it was setting all the weight on this side. So I'm going to preload this one just a little bit. That's going to help this leg to not slide around. And we're going to tighten up our set screws. I'm using 1 wrench to hold the elevator feet and 1 wrench to tighten the nut against the bottom. This is also good proof that I can use the right tool at the right time. In my other videos, I usually grab an adjustable crescent wrench, and I keep on telling y'all I have the right tools. Well, this was a good time for them. That's tight. That's tight. And as far as whether or not this stuff is aligned, all of our props look like they're in a direct line. I'd say that's a win. Very cool. Well, guys, this one's a wrap. This is a home we finished building a couple of months ago. A little history on the tabletop. The owner made this from a red oak tree that was here on the property before they built the home. The posts supporting the table were one of our pet projects when we built the home. Those are embedded in the concrete. The frame was welded up on site. He installed that half of the table and made this leaf. And what we made in this video is the removable prop for it, so he can set this out of the way in a compact area. So we played with the router. We did some welding. We even lost video footage and still tried to recover enough of the project for you to all get an idea of what we did. We had a good time doing it. So if you like what you saw, come back for more. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and check out our other videos. Thanks.